Good afternoon, everyone. I am Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, and I'm really glad you're joining us for a mental health conversation today. And before I introduce our guests, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on why we're doing this event. To be honest with you, even before COVID-19, mental health, the lack of services and support on mental health, just concerns about our families, our kids, our parents about mental health was something we were hearing about constantly on our phones, in emails and letters to me, just when people would stop me in the street. And my background is not in mental health. I'm a national security professional by training, but it just became very, very clear to me very early on in my tenure as a member of Congress that the demand for mental health services across a wide spectrum of needs far outstripped the supply of mental health help. And that the combination of the stigma attached to mental health services and getting help for when we're unhealthy above the head, above the neck, was playing a really big role in people getting access to services, but then people with a wide range of needs weren't getting access to care the way that they really deserved to and needed to. So I hear from people constantly about this issue, and that's why I really think, again, as an outsider coming to this issue, it feels like a crisis. It felt like a national crisis before COVID-19. And then you add onto it this truly unprecedented time, this series of events and this pandemic that has thrown so much uncertainty into our lives, that has affected every single one of us. And we know that people who have experienced mental health issues in the past are really being triggered and exacerbated by the situation. We know that issues of domestic violence and calls on addiction are up to our community leaders, to our law enforcement. And we know that it's created a sense of anxiety. And that, coupled with the health crisis, the public health crisis, where people maybe don't feel safe accessing a hospital or a community health center. Maybe they're closed, right? Many of them have been closed. It really combines to deeply exacerbate what has already been a mental health crisis. And then I will add that what's gone on in the past week with the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the resulting protests, sometimes getting violent, the response by law enforcement, by the president, by senior leadership, has created even more stress and more anxiety in people's lives. So we had planned this for weeks now, but I think it's a really opportune time to bring up this conversation and start to answer some of your questions. We're doing it as a live event so that people can engage with us. We've gotten some questions already, but I want to introduce our guests because we're really lucky to have some real experts from here in Michigan who can help sort through these really tough questions. First of all, we have Justin Hodge. He's a clinical assistant professor of social work at the University of Michigan. And even though here in the 8th District, we represent Michigan State, we still love him and are happy that he's here. He's a Lansing native, so he gets points for that. And he also serves as the chair of the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Community Advisory Board for law enforcement. So he brings a real social justice perspective to advising law enforcement, which I think is a really important value and background to have for this event. We also have Tiana Rooney, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She has her PhD from MSU, so we're thrilled to have her. And she also is a past president of the Michigan Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. So I'm going to let each of them give a couple of opening comments just to set the scene, and then we'll get right to your questions. So I believe I'm turning to Justin first. Justin, take it away.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for having me here, and good afternoon, everyone. So as the Congresswoman mentioned, I grew up in Lansing, and right now I'm a professor of social work at the University of Michigan, but prior to that, my career had been in mental health. I used to work at the community mental health in the Lansing area, serving the Ingham, Eden, Clinton, Tri-County area. While I was there, I did home-based child and family therapy and eventually moved on to doing crisis intervention work. After that, I moved on to doing outpatient therapy for Michigan Medicine and worked at the Ypsilanti Health Center. Right now, I see that there are a lot of mental health challenges that people are facing because of COVID-19, the isolation that comes along with that. And as we see that there are increases in domestic violence and all sorts of other issues, not even to think about yet the economic impact of this. So this is going to be an important conversation for us to have, and I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Tiana.
Yeah, I am going to echo Justin. I'm thrilled to be part of this. So grateful for the invitation. I've been in the world of mental health as a profession for about 20 years now. I'm a transplant to Michigan, actually from Minnesota. So impacted in different ways with what's been happening over the last over a week now. But Michigan is home for me. I am rooted here. And my business has been in existence for about 16 years. I am in outpatient mental health. And so what that means is I am a counselor, a therapist, not an inpatient, not in a hospital, but for someone who is seeking services, who wants to come in for care on a weekly basis, take care of their mental health, their mental wellness, their emotional health, their relationship health. It's really a passion of mine. Over the years, Perspectives Therapy Services is my company, and it has grown to include about 65 therapists who are diverse in their training. So we have social workers, we have psychologists, we have licensed professional counselors, and we have marriage and family therapists. So really what we try to do is match up an ideal fit between a person who's calling for services and what they need and what's unique about their circumstances with a therapist who's going to take incredible care of them, because we know how important that relationship is. That's how real change occurs in counseling and therapy, is that relationship. We have a lot of research to back this up now, between the therapist and the client. So just incredibly happy to be here. Love the topic. It's an important one, and I know we're gonna have some great conversation today.
Great. Thank you for that, both of you. So let's get into it as it relates to COVID, because my phones have been ringing off the hook at our offices, people trying to figure out how to get help. We know that we have the public health challenge, and with the thousands of people who have been sick and who have died, the uncertainty around what to do about preserving public health, but then also the economic fallout, which we're just starting to experience. People laid off, people losing their businesses that they've put their entire life into. We know that things like suicide and drug and alcohol use have really spiked, that social isolation is affecting everything. I'm going to turn to Tiana first. What can we do to help confront the mental health crisis that's resulted from the shutdown, the isolation? Just what are some obvious things we can be doing?
Yeah, Congresswoman, one of the first things that I noticed with the pandemic and when it started to unfold in March is we all hunkered down and we were ready for a sprint. And what we didn't know then was that this was going to be a marathon. And so we prepared for one race, and then time started to go on and we realized, our coping strategies, what was working for us initially, they're not going to be long term. And so we started to we needed to dig deep, and we needed to reach out. The idea of social distancing is an interesting one, because we really need a physical distance. We actually need social connection more than ever. And so one thing that we talk a lot about with our clients and with our loved ones is the importance of doing an inventory of social connections. We can still connect with people even if it's not in the same physical space. And so I like to think about it truly as an inventory. Who in your social network, in your social circle, is good for your thinking, is good for the way you emotionally are in life. And even though it sounds silly, I would say make a list, and then you're going to reach out to those folks. Those are your allies. Those are the people that you want to connect with on a regular basis. And that changes throughout the pandemic, right? For a while it was Zoom meetings, and that was new and that was different. And we're all much more expert than we were 3 months ago on that. And we're moving into a time now where maybe we can go outside and go for a walk and have a mask on and have some distance. But I think what we're seeing is this evolution and this resilience build. And we're adapting. We're adapting to what we need our mental health sort of arsenal to look like in all of this. And we're creative as humans. And so I would say social connection, number one. I think that's what's going to be most impactful for folks, because when we are struggling, we should talk about it. We should let people know in our world, I had a really bad day. And for someone to say, it's okay, I had a rough day last week and I got through it, but what do you need from me? I think those encounters are really, really critical.
And Justin, did you want to add anything to that? I know you're dealing with the same kinds of.
Yeah, I'd like to. Yeah, I'm seeing those same kinds of issues, and I think it's really important for us to think about it as physical distancing and not social distancing. We need those social connections. And we also need to try to challenge some of the stigmatization of getting mental health services, especially during this time. I mean, there are still options for people to receive services now. Teletherapy is an option, and just as effective as in-person therapy. This will pop up in the stream, but there's a text service that you can use if you're in crisis. So crisistextline.org, if you're in crisis and you need to chat with a counselor, it's a 24/7 available free service that you can use and tell your friends about. But there are a variety of services that are still available. It's just going to be a matter of getting people connected with those services during this really challenging time.
Yeah, I think it's a great point about the stigma. And I certainly grew up in a family, I'm sure many, many Michiganders did, where there really wasn't any support for the idea of going to see a counselor. We never talked about it. I would never dare to raise it and say, oh, this is something that I might want to do. It just wasn't discussed. And then years later, when I was applying to the CIA, they asked me to list every single time I had ever gone to a counselor or support of any kind. Now, I hadn't, but that sure sends a signal, right? If you're applying for a job and they're asking, now they've changed that. But I think it's still something that a lot of families don't discuss. A lot of people don't want to be open about. So I think it's good that people are told over and over again, please just try it, just reach out. So let me ask you, Justin, help us understand a little bit what we're seeing now. The frustration from the lockdown. We know that we all felt frustration, and Tiana saying that we all started with Zoom, and that was kind of the new thing. I think there's a lot of fatigue with some of the ways that we've learned to communicate. I don't know why I get more tired from a Zoom meeting than I do from a regular meeting. There's some reason, but I do. Can you talk about whether these our social distancing and all these rules and the staying at home has contributed in any way to what we're seeing now in our city streets in Michigan and outside of Michigan? Talk to us about George Floyd and some of the impacts that that's having on people, maybe compounding some of the stress that they might have been feeling.
So what we're really seeing with COVID-19 is it's shining a light on the inequities in our society. So health inequities, wealth inequities, people are paying attention to them more now. I think that does contribute to the protests. I mean, these violence against Black and Brown communities is not new. It's been going on, but there hasn't been as much of a focus as right now. And I think a lot of that is due to social justice issues being more of a focus and at the forefront of people's minds. I don't think that necessarily being in lockdown has made people more likely to protest. Like, that's not what's bringing people out. I think that now there's a renewed interest in for people that maybe were aware but hadn't taken action before. But for some people, maybe this is their first experience in seeing these inequities. So I think that, yes, they are connected in the sense that COVID-19 has shined the spotlight on these inequities, and that's causing people to take notice and to take action at this time. And I hope that there will be sustained action, because we need to make long-lasting changes, and we can't just let when the next thing happens, like if there's a spike in infections or if there's something else that happens, we need to keep our focus on these social justice issues, and we need that sustained action. Yeah,
it was interesting. I was in Lansing yesterday. We did a bit of a socially distanced cleanup from the night before. I just started calling around to every leader in the community just to check in, just sort of how you doing? What are you hearing? What are you thinking? And there was really a variety of responses. I mean, I think there was a lot of people just, the overwhelming feeling was exhaustion. That, as you say, this idea, especially, for folks who are older and who lived through the civil rights movement and sort of are just saddened and shocked that they're experiencing some of the same things now, and that their grandkids are kind of learning the same lessons. The overwhelming feeling I felt was exhaustion. Let me ask a couple of other questions that we've gotten in. So maybe Tiana, you can start off. How do we start to destigmatize mental illness? Why do we differentiate mental illness from physical illness? This is Senator Stabenow was always talking about we have to make healthcare neck and up the same as neck and below, and kind of help us through how we can destigmatize this issue.
I think one thing that's important is language. Language is something that sometimes we can all rally around. So in our practice, we actually talk very little about mental illness, and we talk a lot about mental health. Mental health is something that impacts all of us, and it's on a continuum. Again, I have folks that I work with that, for the most part, they're very functional in life, and they go through and they're effective as parents and family members and caregivers and professionals, but they still struggle, and they deserve access to care. And so what we try to do is again, just talk about it as mental health, where we all have to tend to that part of our life. And when I talk about mental health, I'm really referring to thoughts and feelings and behaviors and relationships. And so that's sort of the myriad I use to identify mental health. And I know this is probably going to be cliche, but we need to talk about it. I think having conversations like this, we just came off of May being Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a big month in our practice, as you can imagine. It's a time for us to celebrate what we do as counselors and therapists, but it's also a chance to acknowledge the courage and the bravery of our clients for picking up the phone and making that call after they've carried around our business card for 3 months or so. I think that conversations are meaningful. Congresswoman, you had talked about an experience you had where maybe as an adolescent, it wasn't on your radar to go to a counselor. It wasn't part of that culture at that point in time. And my experience with that now is we will have a teenager come in who is just having some legitimate struggles that we need to both intervene and do some prevention work. And before we know it, 3 of that teenager's friends are also in our practice because it's working. And they talk to their friends about, hey, I don't know what magic this is, but when I go in and I start to talk about things and express myself, I feel different. And so I think that those conversations have a positive contagion effect. And that's how we're going to start to make a change. And I don't mean to say that everyone needs to go to counseling. I don't believe that that's true. But I do believe that meaningful conversations, authentic conversations about our mental health, just holding space with a friend and allowing them just to be and to process how they're doing without getting too scared, without trying to make the tears stop because it makes us uncomfortable that they're crying, is all part of this movement. And so that those are my thoughts about mental illness and mental health.
So, my only experience looking at the mental health issue from sort of inside our family or in our community is, I'm married to a 30-year Army officer. My stepdaughter and son-in-law are in the Army. And I did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military as a CIA officer. So that was when the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder really became part of our language, and really people started to know what that was. PTSD is something that you can see on TV shows, and it's like in the kind of common culture, but it wasn't. The first time I ever went to Iraq in 2004, I don't think I ever heard that term. And the military family is not always a family where people feel comfortable going to see someone, because it could affect your career. And there was a real problem around that. And access to care, right? People walking in and being able to say, I need this and I should have this covered. So let's talk a little bit about, Justin, access to care. We know that care is high cost. Certainly psychiatric care in particular is high cost. And that discourages a lot of people from going to get that service, even if they've readied themselves to make the leap that they need some sort of help. Talk to me about how you've seen this affect people and what you have in terms of ideas of how to make sure we get people access to care that they need.
So I think the big thing is we need more funding at the state level and federal level for mental health services. So during the time when I worked at Community Mental Health, I was there during the Snyder administration when the serious cuts to mental health first happened. And that resulted in a lot of we had to let go of a lot of clients that didn't have Medicaid. And frequently, in many of those situations, we weren't able to come up with a strong transition plan, which is not anything you ever want to have to do. But we haven't restored good funding to our mental health system, and we're still suffering from those effects. Counties are trying to figure out ways to resolve it on their own through millages, but any of those kinds of measures are just going to be a stopgap until we get increased funding at the state level. And that's where it starts. I mean, we can't really provide the services unless they're there to provide. We don't have enough mental health professionals either. Every place I've worked, there's always been a need for more people, particularly child psychiatrists. I mean, we need more people going into the field, and we need greater funding for these services if we want people to be able to have access to them. And we also need to be able to overcome some of the barriers that people have in getting care. They may have health insurance, but if they have transportation challenges or they don't know where the services are, we need to get them to them. That's why I think some of the best work that I did was when I was doing home-based work, where I was able to deliver those services right in people's homes, in libraries, in schools, wherever we could meet them at to provide them. So we need more funding, and we need to expand the services that are available.
Yeah, and Tiana, why don't we talk a little bit about why there is such a shortage of mental health professionals in our state, in the country? It's really amazing from what I understand, particularly in folks who provide that support through a nonprofit organization, through a community health center. We could probably have, one person for every 10 jobs that's available out there. What do you think that's about, and how do we incentivize, how do we properly incentivize people to go into such a tough field?
Congressman, I'll take a shot at this one. I think that access to care is important. I think that it's imperative. And the idea of supply and demand comes to mind for me, that the demand for healthcare services, if you think about it as actually a good thing, that people are making those phone calls, that people are reaching out for services like they haven't in the past. And I think that that's maybe where we are in our socio-historical context right now, is there's a lag of providers and there's an influx of people who are interested in the services. And so the silver lining of that is it's a good thing. We just need to, I think, properly educate our middle schoolers and our high schoolers about this as a really amazing career opportunity, that this is healthcare. Mental health care is in fact healthcare. So if you're thinking about that as an option, being a nurse and being a physician's assistant and being a physician is great if you want to work in medicine. But there are also these other, if we pivot just to the left, these other career opportunities that are amazingly rewarding. And so here's where social work comes in, and clinical psychology and marriage and family therapy. And so I think we're just in this odd place in history of needing to shine a spotlight on these are viable career options that you can be really satisfied and really fulfilled and economically successful by being a mental health provider. I think, Justin, back in the day, right, when you and I were probably entering the career that we've chosen, we probably heard from a lot of people, oh boy, you're not going to make a lot of money. That's sort of a known, right, idea within the world of counseling or the world of social work. So we did it because we're passionate about it. And I think compensation is important, don't get me wrong, but we are a group of people who make decisions based on our well-being and our personal fulfillment. And we're catching up. I think that we can live very fulfilling lives as therapists and economically good lives as well. And so my thought is we have to just talk to our younger folks and let them know this is an amazing opportunity that you have in front of you, because the clients are there. People are reaching out. They are looking for help.
Great. I'm going to take a question that we just got online here, kind of live. And I think it's one that I've heard so much about, and it's about our kids. It's about school-age children and what they're experiencing. So the question is, why are we seeing so much social anxiety with school children these days? Is it really increasing, or are we just identifying it more? And then how will these kids be affected by the possible changes we're likely to see in the fall? Some kids will be going back. Some kids may be in a hybrid situation. So talk to us about the kids and not just what's happening, but if you could, for the parents out there, what can they do? What are the practical steps that they can take if they see some of this anxiety in their own child? And let me start with Justin.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think that we are better at identifying it, and kids are better about expressing it. But I think there are a number of reasons why people are more anxious during this time. Bullying is a serious issue. We know that from a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of the White House against certain groups, kids experience that in the classroom, and they experience that in their social interactions, and that's going to take a toll. We know that social media can be a very powerful tool, but we also know that it can be challenging for many people based on the experiences that people will have there. So there are so many interactions that kids can have now that will create more anxiety and depression. Plus the uncertainty of everything. Everyone should be a little bit anxious about, we don't know what's going to happen next. And with kids having to go back into a learning situation that's unclear, a hybrid setting may not be the best learning style for every kid. Kids may be in homes where there's not access to high-speed internet. So how are they going to be able to get that information? It's challenging. There are a lot of challenges that people are facing. And I think what parents can do during this time is reassure the kids that they're there to support them, that there are other supports and services available. I know that just because people won't be going in person to many schools, or they may be going less, there are still staff members that are there to support outside of the school. So making that support known and really leaning into your social connections is going to be really important.
Tiana, did you want to answer that one as well?
I'll add a little bit based on treatment for anxiety. I think that sometimes it's not intuitive for parents to know how to work with anxiety when their kid has this influx with anxiety. When we have this innate sense to just make it stop for our kids. We don't like to see them struggle, and sometimes that's counter to what needs to happen with anxiety treatment. And so I think that we can all relate to when we become flooded with anxiety, our sort of core instinct or our gut instinct is to withdraw and to avoid. And those are the things that we don't want to have as part of our coping strategies. Sometimes we need to do it for a little respite, but really anxiety treatment is about engagement, and it's about leaning into and exposing ourselves in small doses, in tolerable doses, to what we're afraid of. And so we really do a lot of coaching with parents to talk about, okay, so your adolescent is really not wanting to go to school. How can we gradually re-engage them? Because if we just pull out, if we do the opposite, that is not a solution. It's not a long-term viable option for treating anxiety effectively. We want that person to grow up and to engage in a profession or a career or college. That's not going to happen if we don't start to expose them to anxiety invoking experiences. So again, just from a treatment perspective, that's the protocol that we use. We're supportive and we offer reassurance, but we also offer encouragement to take risks and to lean in and to engage.
Let me ask Tiana, just on that subject, just tell us what you're seeing in your own practice in terms of young people and some of the issues that have come up. I think the folks who ask this question are asking something real, which is, hey, I don't know if I'm noticing this in my child because we're now trapped in a house together 24/7 for 2.5 months, or if, the situation is creating it, or if this is just normal. So what have parents been coming to you with their worries and concerns, and maybe help our audience understand kind of what that all means when you're a parent?
Yeah, I want to validate the neighbor that wrote this question, because I think it's a really common one. This is one that we hear on our intake line a lot, this idea of social anxiety. I want to use a word that Justin talked about, which is bullying. There are a lot of reasons that our kids, our students, our teenagers are are fearful, are nervous about going to school or being in social settings. So I think it's real. I think it's very real. And I think that there's a historical component that those of us who didn't grow up in a world of social media and video games and being plugged in from a technology perspective, we don't quite get this yet. We don't understand really what it's like to be an 11-year-old or a 13-year-old who is inundated with information. So I have a lot of respect for that. We learn from our clients. When we get folks into our office, doesn't matter if you're 7 or you are 70, we try to understand, what is your reality like? Because I don't know it. I can't put myself in that place. So please teach me. So I assume that this is a parent who has crafted this question for us, and I think it's coming from his or her best place of wanting to care for their child. And so I would just validate, yes, I think you're right. I think you're seeing something that deserves attention and needs attention. And the best way to do that with our kids is just open up a really simple conversation of, what do you think might be helpful right now? I see that you're struggling. I see that you don't want to do certain things or you avoid certain things. How can we be helpful? There are professionals that you can go in and just try it out. That's kind of how we pitch our services sometimes to adolescents who are unsure or uncertain, or who maybe have some preconceived notions about what counseling will be. We always say, just try it. Let's just try an experiment. And if after 2 or 3 sessions it's awful, then we're going to try something different. Most of the time, by that time, we're able to establish at least the beginnings of a trusting relationship and start to make some positive changes.
Great. And Justin, while we're on the issue of children, because I know we're all so focused on our kids and helping them through this real uncertainty, what about what they're seeing on TV now? When they're seeing, if not in their own state, on television and other places, they're seeing protests, they're seeing violence, they're seeing what feels like, real deep tension that's come to the surface. How do we explain that, particularly to younger children? How should we help them understand what's going on?
Yeah, again, I think this is a great opportunity for people to address these social justice issues in their own home. Their kids are going to be seeing these things. They see the protests. There are protests all over the nation. They see the violence. Now is the time to address it, and to address some of these inequities. Help your kids understand that there are social inequities, there are wealth inequities in our society. These are things that they're able to understand. You sit down and have a conversation with a kid about these things, they will understand, and they'll be able to build their understanding of it over time. But trying to make them not see it, or trying to just explain it away, is not going to be good for them in the long run. We need to be preparing our kids to face the very real realities that they were going to grow up and experience potentially, or know someone that's going to have to experience some of these challenges. So honest conversation is what we need right now.
That's very helpful. I just want to give you each an opportunity to maybe recommend some resources for folks if they have concerns, whether they're watching TV and want to help their kids through what they're seeing on TV and have those honest conversations. How do they get the tools to do that? How do they learn themselves? It's sometimes a very new conversation. And then in terms of increased anxiety, stresses on all of us that are creating, in some cases, real mental health challenges, where do people go? What are some good resources that you would direct people to? So let me start with Tiana, and then we'll go to Justin.
All right, a couple things come to my mind. One, we have a wealth of information. I think sometimes we underestimate that. We have a wealth of information quite literally at our fingertips. So if there are concepts or phrases that we don't know much about, or we think that we need to incorporate into our conversations at home, I would say pull together as a family and really just do a research project. We did this in our family when COVID first came out. We talked about what's the difference between a virus and bacteria, and what's an infection, and why is coronavirus different than COVID-19. And so we really dove in from this place of curiosity. And I think now we are at this opportunity of, let's dive in from this place of curiosity of, let's look up the word racism. Let's look up the word anti-racism, and what do we start to do as a family? There is amazing resources on the internet. Of course, be a good consumer. When you're going out there and you're doing your surfing, you want to get some good websites first and foremost before you sit down with your family. But there is amazing information out there. So that would be my first and foremost, is you don't have to go far. I would say it's really right there in front of you. In terms of community resources, also some good ones. Community mental health agencies, there are Facebook groups, and many of them are really positive and really inspiring. And you can start to see which neighbors you share values with and you share beliefs with. And I think that it's a neat way to make connections. And so I would say just reach out. What we can reach out to do right now is into our communities, into our neighborhoods. I think resources can also be when you go out and you volunteer and you go to a food bank or you go to a humane society. Again, those are resources that we're looking for. Those are human resources, human relationships that are going to be beneficial for us. So the text line, the crisis line that Justin brought up earlier, it's a good one. We should have it accessible. I think in most homes, this is the website. The text number is 741-741. When you text that, there it is. You are going to have free, immediate, exchange of counseling and crisis intervention with someone who is trained. So I would say, be resourceful. That's what we have at our disposal here, and being resilient. Just be resourceful. Use what you have at your fingertips.
Great. Justin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so we have some of the finest universities in the country here in Michigan, including the University of Michigan and Michigan State. And many of the universities do free teach outs. So you could go on there, and there are a number of free trainings you can go through, free courses that you can go through. So many of the topics that we've talked about today, you could go on there and engage in a free class, and then take that information and pass it on to your kids. And looking for how you can get services, the crisis, if you're in a crisis, the crisis helpline is an excellent resource. But if you are not in a crisis and you're just looking to connect with mental health services, engaging with your local community mental health, even if it's just to be referred out. Really, if you contact any of these places that are providing mental health services, even if you're not eligible for services, whether it's because they don't take your insurance or there's some other reason, they're going to assist you in finding care. So they'll be able to refer you someplace. But make use of these public universities that we have here, because, they're there to provide information to the public. There are so many free resources, and then get referrals. People want to help get the services out there. It's hard to make that first step, but if you can just make that one first step, you'll be able to get what you need.
Justin, I want to just add to that, because I think it's important to maybe ask your physician. Your physician will have some referrals as well. Your family doctor, your pediatrician wants to be helpful. So that's an avenue that you can take. Teachers, school social workers, they oftentimes have lists of reputable counselors, therapists in the area that they can help. I also want to talk about these ideas of meditation and mindfulness. These are experiences that people are wanting more of, or at least are curious about. And I would say there's a lot of apps out there that are either free or 99 cents, very low cost, that you can start to just experiment a little bit with. What is meditation? Could I do that? Is it what I thought it was, or is it very different? And so I would say, again, just explore some apps and try some new things out. If you've not attempted to incorporate mindfulness into your life, which is really just living in the moment. It sounds like a big fancy word that's very hard for Americans to do, but it is important and it does work. I would say, again, just research those concepts, those ideas, and talk about it with your neighbors and your family and your friends, because they'll have some ideas for you as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up meditation, because that's something that anyone can do at home. And there are a variety of apps like Calm, Headspace. Those are ones that they're free. You can download. NAMI is a great resource. So you could go to NAMI's website and then find access to how you can access other mental health services. But yeah, make use of those. You can meditate at home, proven effects to increase your mental health. So yeah, do that.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, we're just about out of time here. I want to thank Tiana Rooney and Justin Hodge for participating in this with us. It's just been such an amazing experience to be on the receiving end of so many people who want more answers. So this is a beginning of the conversation, hopefully not an end to the conversation. Thank you to the work that you both do for our community. And right now, service to your community is service to your country. It's really important stuff that when we have local leaders helping others through this really trying time. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who is watching and listening as we start this conversation. So have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thanks so much to our guests.
Thank you, Congresswoman.